Hey everyone, welcome to the 293rd episode of Primo Radical. Today on the show we're going to be doing something a little different, as you can probably already tell. This is just an audio interview with my friend Chrispy. And this is kind of a throwback to the original days of Primo Radical. You know, we're currently celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the show. And back when I first started, the show was really just hanging out with friends. It was all audio, there was no video. And slowly over time, I started doing these political type interviews that the channel has got, acclaimed for or known for. So kind of going back to the roots today a little bit, just hanging out with my buddy. And Chris, you actually, you've been a friend of mine for a very long time. We've been friends since, I think, 9th grade. And have had lots of good adventures together. And you've actually been on the show, I think, 4 or 5 times originally. Last time was episode 99, which was a while ago. And that was back when you were living in New Orleans, but now you're back in Connecticut. Mm-hmm. So
was I in New Orleans?
Yep.
Was that 2016, right?
I think so. 2016, 2017. It was probably 2017. It was probably early 2017.
Oh, so that would have been, I would have come back up, and while I was up, I would have sort of said, hey, let's do a show and see who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, you've been on several episodes. You're on episode number 4, so you're one of my original guests. And I know we were talking a bit of just reflecting on the show and how it's changed over time, and it's really, it's been an interesting evolution because, again, back in the original days, it was just hanging out with buddies, kind of talking about not just politics, but, politics was a big part of it because it was back during the 2016 election, and, there was those early debates with Donald Trump when he was one of 17 different Republicans running. But, there's a lot of just talking about funny stuff that happened in high school or, sports or The Simpsons and TV shows and movies, and it wasn't explicitly political. And, we were kind of just talking about, it's interesting how that show of just hanging out with friends evolved over time into this thing where, I ended up started having political people and celebrities, and I've had other celebrities on the show too. Like I had a bunch of the Power Rangers on the show. I've had a bunch of musicians. Donovan was on the show. I had UFC fighters like Ken Shamrock and Hoist Gracie. Had other wrestlers, Jake the Snake Roberts and Kane. Actually, the first celebrity guest I ever had on the show was episode number 5. I had Bob Backlund on the show. So, but it's funny that it kind of morphed from that into this channel that I've had Noam Chomsky on several times. Had Jimmy Dore and Matt Taibbi are pretty frequent guests. And
so if you had everybody that's been on the show in a small room for a reunion, it would be a very motley assortment indeed.
Yeah, but again, it's gotten political over time, and we're talking about I've taken some hiatuses over the past 10 years. It hasn't been 10 years of consistent podcasting or YouTubing or whatever. It's been there was a stint there where I was going regular for a while, and then I just kind of petered off where I have sort of little spurts of inspiration where I'll have a bunch of people on over a few months, and then it'll die down again, and I'll take a year off. But I think the thing is, I just get burnt out on politics, and I was kind of asking you earlier, do you ever feel that way where you just kind of where you're really kind of passionate about something or interested in something, but then you just kind of stop being motivated or find something unpleasant or daunting about it, and you don't want to kind of deal with it anymore?
Well, I'm a very obsessive kind of person. If I get into something, I want to kind of go into it as deep as I can. I used to do, back when I was more active as a musician, we had a coach come in one time for the guitar circle, just a group of maybe 6 or 7 guitar players. And we would perform repertoire and hold shows and things like that. We had a guy come in who was classically trained, and he would explain that in music you have these 2 dynamics. You have a mole which is an element which sort of digs deeper and deeper and deeper, and typically that's associated with like repetition in music. Like if you think of something like Philip Glass as like the extreme of like just like digging into something for like 20 minutes, half hour straight. And on the top, on the surface, you have like the rabbits who go about the garden. You have a very nice garden.
Thank you.
By the way.
We actually don't maintain it at all, so thank you.
Okay, well, it's very nice to have. But you have a rabbit who looks sort of on the surface and is hopping around to the different spots, the different leaves, and trying to dig things up, and is never quite content, is always kind of looking for the next thing. And I think there's maybe like a personality correlation between those two things. And I'm certainly, I would consider myself to be in the first group. Like I just try to go, if I do something, I try to go as far as I can to the point where, you know, I could be fixated on something for like 5 or 10 years. And I notice also, when I reflect on it, that often my closest friends have been people who are like rabbits. They're the ones who like bring sort of new things in. Say, hey, what about this? Hey, what about this? Hey, what about this? Mm-hmm. So that's our, even like creatively too, like the people I've gotten on best with creatively have always been like people who are like always kind of like bringing in different components, and I'll just take it and look at it and go like, okay, well, it fits into this or this like this. So it's not really a problem that I have. I can understand where somebody else might be coming from. There is something which is interesting to me about your situation. Because what I remember about that time, like mid-teens, is that it was a very like exciting time in the media landscape. Because
so yeah, just the reason I started my podcast, it's actually weird. I had a radio show going when I was in grad school. I started a radio show, but then it was like January of 2015. Multiple people who we knew all started podcasts like the same time, and I don't think like necessarily one did it because of the other. I just think that like something happened in late 2014, early 2015, where like podcasting just became this thing that like, oh, anybody can do it, and like tons of people started podcasts. So
yeah, it's definitely like, I think it was a time in the lifespan of the internet where it was like, it was Web 2.0, but it wasn't quite as like clamped down as it is today, where everything is very like streamlined. Most things are organized or connected to like large organizations. It was sort of like a little bit like a Wild West, where as long as you had a few resources, you could put something up that would potentially like reach a lot of other people. And I think you've always kind of had this sort of journalistic bug. You have always liked kind of like going on adventures and kind of like looking at things for yourself. And in high school, you were on the school paper, and you liked kind of like digging up stories. Sometimes they would get you into trouble.
Yeah.
But
and it was a mixture of things too. Like there were real stories in there, but like there was a lot of stuff too where it was like, you know, comedic or subversive, just like kind of trying to get the administration mad at us, basically. Because I think that's funny. I don't know. I just enjoy stuff like that. But yeah, I definitely have a journalistic bent, and I would say on the political front, like I have an interest in political philosophy, and I think that kind of like guided the show a bit too, where, you know, I like, I've always been drawn to like third party politics and like alternative perspectives. So like hearing about those and then digging more into those and like meeting, you know, different people in different movements and understanding, you know, like the history of how did these ideas come about, or how do these groups get formed, things like that. Like that's all, yeah, like that kind of journalism is interesting to me. But, you know, where it becomes daunting, there's a couple of fronts, but one of them obviously, and I think anybody kind of can see it, is, you know, the really polarized political landscape that we have now. And it's just like, so, you know, you're on one side or the other. It's like, I just look at it and like, yeah, I don't really want to take a side here. I don't really think like, you know, I don't want to be like boxed into like having to adopt this wide set of beliefs of these, you know, large governing like this thesis is an antithesis that's like happening culturally. Like I don't like kind of like fitting into that paradigm, I guess, or being forced into that paradigm.
Yeah. Do you feel that's something that is like, is it something which is threatening to you like on a personal level, or is it something more just like you don't want to deal with like the discourse coming from either side? Like, are you worried that is it something
Well, I think
you're going
it's
to say
just
something that's going to like
it's stupid and repugnant to some degree, and like it's very simplistic, and like the whole kind of Twitter X culture. And I would say X has actually gotten much worse over time too, where like everything now is very engagement bait, and it's just like, basically like suck it liberals, or like, the conservatives are Nazis or whatever. Like you say like a certain thing to like get a bunch of engagement, and like it's very simplistic and dumb, and like there's no nuance. So like that's really annoying, and just like, like people like, I don't know, like people also have a hard time understanding that like not wanting to participate in that kind of back and forth, left, right, conservative, liberal sort of dialogue, that sort of mainstream Republican, Democrat, simplistic thinking, that like not participating in that is somehow taking a stand for the other side that person's not on.
Yep.
Right. So like there's, like there's the people who I've been more drawn to and have had on the show, like, I would describe them as, like populist, or like sort of outside of like just that direct right left sort of paradigm. And like there's a lot of suspicion of that sort of standpoint, like, oh well, you must really be on the other side, you're really helping them. And it's really both sides, right? Because the conservatives just think you're a communist, and the liberals think you're a Nazi. That's what it comes down to. It's like, are you a Nazi or a communist? A Nazi or a communist? And like there's no sort of nuance or middle ground.
Well, I think it resembles if you ever get into, sometimes if you get into like religious debates with people, there are people who are like, if you take like two paradigms, like you say, okay, so you have like a believer and an atheist. And then in the middle, you have somebody who is an agnostic. And this person will actually annoy both parties more than the opposing party actually annoys each other. You're like the worst of the sort. Because you are like, I suppose the argument, you're like the enabler of like the worst characteristics of whatever the opposite side is. Because it's like cowardly because you're not taking a stand, and yet you're also enabling like, the worst extremes of either side.
Well, what I find annoying too is like, I think there are other big picture or more malevolent things that are happening that like don't even get any attention because of that. So like, recently, Donald Trump, who was kind of, I think he was kind of helped into office to a large degree by Silicon Valley and these, by organizations like Palantir, for example. And now Palantir is partnering with the administration to come up with, basically this surveillance network, just to kind of have like a social credit system, basically, which is funny because conservatives are so critical of like communist China and social credit. But Palantir is like facilitating that by putting all this government data and public information and stuff together. But like, you don't hear liberals talking about that. They're talking about, we don't have kings and whatever, getting upset that Donald Trump is sending ICE out and sending the Marines out, or National Guard or whatever. So, and there's probably, there's good reason to focus on those issues, but there's other issues that kind of fall by the wayside that I think are equally important, or maybe more important in some regards. And like, if you talk about those things, then you're somehow on the side of the person who you're criticizing because you want to criticize them for a different reason or something. It's just really, it's just dumb, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you were saying that you see probably the worst cases of that being in a place like X.
Yeah, X is really the worst. X has become like...
It's funny, too, because I used to really like X or Twitter the most out of all the social media platforms, because you would get like the most pushback there for any point of view. Like, on something like Facebook, if you have like all friends who are like liberal or conservative, if they just say one thing, everybody will just chime in.
I mean, Facebook is bad too. I don't know if you're like in like local town groups and stuff, but like even the most innocuous posts end up...
Really?
just seems like everything everything always goes back to these partisan politics. It seems like people just kind of want to make it about, again, are you supporting the president who's who is a wannabe king and dictator, or are you an anarchist who wants to see our country burn? Like, it always goes to these really simplistic terms.
Yeah, well, people are really stressed out. I think a lot of that comes from like an emotional or maybe a psychological place. So the landscape, you would say that in the last 10 years from when you started Primo, the political landscape has changed a lot in that direction, and that is part of what is sort of changed the work a little bit.
Definitely, it changed at least like within the first year of starting, because when Donald Trump got elected, and I went back and I've been listening to some old episodes, and it's funny because like when me and the gang are just sort of watching the original debates, like there's discussion around how ridiculous it would be for Donald Trump to actually win. There's some of that, but like, we're talking a lot about like the issues, and like Syria was a big issue in the 2016 election, at least in like the early 2015 debates. There's a lot of talk about like what's happening with Syria. And then like after the election, like we just start talking about all these different sorts of things, like the alt-right. What does it mean to be alt-right, and sort of like the, identity politics and Jordan Peterson, all this stuff. So like the conversation really shifted, I think, like right around the 2016 election, right after the 2016 election.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's just been kind of, growing over time. And obviously, a lot's happened over the past 10 years. You talk about COVID and J6 and, the war in Ukraine. Like a lot of stuff has kind of happened over those years. But as far as like the partisanship in the U.S., like it is just getting, I don't know. I feel like it's gotten really bad. I don't know if you can say it's necessarily worse now than it was 2 or 3 years ago, but we're like consistently in this bad place where like there's no actual real dialogue happening, and it's just like insults and gotchas and people getting worked up about like just dumb things.
Yeah, media stunts. And I mean, I think there is, I don't know if it's within the last 10 years, but I think there is like a difference in the tone of like people talking about politics. I think there's like, with a lot of things in the internet, it's kind of like that. It's like all the same problems, they're all just like right in front of you. Like if you're like a content creator and, you're small time, you maybe do something else for your living, you make something, like maybe a couple people say it, yeah, that's good. But you can also see like this guy over here is doing something sort of similar. Maybe he's kind of like gaming it a little bit, and he has hundreds of thousands or millions of views. So what's the difference between him and me? And you start getting into that kind of thinking where it's like you're comparing yourself, and which always existed. It's just now the numbers are just like always around you. So you're constantly thinking about things that are happening that like aren't really relevant to you.
Yeah, and I would say that, too, for me personally, like just like constantly looking at like those stupid metrics, like the views and all that stuff, and the retweets and likes and all that stuff, like just those metrics like sort of guiding how you even put your sort of ideas out there, and like what your ideas are, right? It's like you want to get the most engagement. So that goes back to like why X has gotten so stupid, because people are getting paid based on how many views and how much engagement they get. And what gets the most views and engagement, it's putting out really dumb, provocative tweets. Like that's it.
Now, when you're in front of that, do you feel like the sort of the tone of what you do or the purpose of what you do has shifted? Do you feel like you have like, since you have like a modest platform, and you have like a sense of like, well, I really dislike the way people talk about politics, and I think there are more important things we could talk about. Do you feel like there's more of a sense of like, I have a responsibility to the discourse compared to when you started out? Because I think back then in those days, none of us were ever like professional journalists, but it was just like another topic that that would come up along with like, movies or philosophy or whatever was going on locally, just like another kind of thing that might come up.
Yeah.
Not like a super serious, like, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing too, of like just going back to how the show has changed, my show specifically, because like an audience grew over specifically the political interviews that I did. And I did other interviews too. Like I said, I had a bunch of the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers on the show. I had a bunch of famous professional wrestlers and musicians, and I had other people on the show. But like what got a following was having Noam Chomsky or Matt Taibbi or Jimmy Dore, having like certain people on the show with a political following, and they kind of started following this channel. So, you know, that again kind of like steered the direction of the show. Like, well, nobody's going to care if I talk to this old blues musician, so why should I have him on the show?
So you kind of were following your interest, but it was kind of like these things were kind of growing the channel a little bit more, at least in terms of its viewer base compared to sort of the more local interest kind of.
Yeah.
And at first it was kind of more concomitant. You can kind of manage.
Well, let me give you an example.
Sure.
So the last time you were on the show, episode 99, you know, we sat down for probably a couple hours, had a nice conversation, talked about, you know, cool things. We probably enjoyed it. We might enjoy listening to that episode, you and me. That was probably, I think that was the lowest listened to episode of the podcast ever. It got like 20 views.
Yeah.
So
fine by me.
Yeah, but you get what my point is. Like, it's sort of, you put work into something, you want some kind of number to give you a response on that, right? Like, oh, you're doing a good job, like people care about this. But again, it's just weird, like subjectively looking back, like the episodes where we were just hanging out and just talking about, again, maybe some politics, but maybe a lot of TV shows and movies and sports, and again, just like funny things that happened to us. Like that was a lot more entertaining to record than like, oh, I have to interview this guy this week who came out with this book, and I may not have read the book or heard of the guy before, but I have to put out content this week. So like it just, you know, it becomes a job. It becomes not having fun at a certain point.
Yeah, and you try to balance the sort of, because you got to do like some stuff, like with anything, you got to do some stuff you don't like to get it going, and then the trade-off is that you get to do things that you do like. It's like you're kind of like paying a little bit to have fun of a little bit higher quality in the future, but eventually that starts not paying out as much, and you run into a place where you're like, am I doing the right thing, or should I be doing something different? Or
yeah,
I think it's totally natural. And
yeah, and you know, I like you had suggested maybe doing another channel, and I kind of thought about that at different times, but the whole niche thing is where I get hung up, because again, I have like these sort of varied interests, or like kind of want to talk about different things. So like, do I need one channel to talk about politics, one channel to talk about professional wrestling, one channel to talk about old TV shows, one channel, like I kind of just want to talk about, you know, I guess culture generally, maybe that's sort of the thing, but it's it's hard to, I guess, you know, get a niche there. We were also talking before we started recording about Joe Rogan, how we think Joe Rogan really, he was able to kind of, you know, do something that no one else really has been able to do, because he married a lot of different audiences together into one following, where he had UFC fans, he had people that were into comedy, or, you know, again, like movies and pop culture, and, you know, people are into UFC and politics. Like he married all these different groups together into like one really large following. And I don't know if anyone else has really done anything that similar. Like it's, you know, you mentioned Bill Maher. He's probably maybe the closest, because he has a comedic background, but has been focused on politics a lot the past 20 years. But outside of, again, really just outside of Joe Rogan, I don't see anybody really doing that. It's either you fall into like a certain genre of like, this is what you're going to sort of talk about.
I think that might be a change that has taken place over time. Like,
well, because again, he's one of the oldest, right? Like he's like OG podcaster since whatever 2010 or whenever he started.
Yeah. Did he start in 2010?
I don't. Again, like I I was thinking back to that whole Carlos Mencia thing. Like that's sort of when he came back on my radar after, Fear Factor or whatever. And I think that was about the time that he started his podcast. So if I had to guess, I'd say, like 09 maybe, 2010, something like that.
I think there was a sense with Web 2.0 when it was kind of like a newer thing of like the things being sort of like interconnected. I think you're exactly right. Like the appeal for me about Joe Rogan was that like he has fighting backgrounds, and it's sort of like this. His show is kind of like this metaphor for it, because he'll like take on anybody. He'll like take on people from different occupational backgrounds and like political leanings, even people who will like disagree with him. It's like you're stepping into the ring in a way, and I think around that time, people saw him, and he's really like living sort of the internet dream, like the actual internet dream. You're getting paid, you're doing you, and you're getting paid to do it. So you're like so there's this dream of like, I can make whatever, I don't have to go through the hurdles that somebody in entertainment, 70 years ago would have had to do to be able to reach people. I can just do that. I have the materials here. And he was kind of like, even though he was famous when he did it, but he kind of like, all I'm doing is just putting my life on a screen or in a speaker, and it's interesting enough to other people that, I can make something out of it. I can make a career or a show out of it. And around that time, when the podcasts we were doing kind of locally here started popping up, I think there was that sense of like,
anybody can do that.
anybody can do it. Yeah, we all our lives are all interesting in some way, and if we have the means and the initiative to put it up, we can, make something that somebody might want to listen to.
Yeah. But again, I think you run into a brick wall of reality at some point where that's not really the case. And again, it's because you brought up Joe Rogan was famous, right? Like he was on news radio, he was on Fear Factor, he was on the Man Show, he did this UFC commentating, so like he had already a built-in audience to care about his show, right? But like if you don't have that, then you kind of have to cultivate your own audience, and the easiest way to do that is to focus on one specific thing, whether that is politics or it is professional wrestling or whatever, like whatever your kind of thing is that you're most interested in, I guess. But it's just hard for me to like stay focused on one thing for, and especially, politics is maybe the worst, honestly, because it's so contentious. And maybe that's why it makes it easy to build an audience around it, because people care about it and engage with it, right? Like everybody has an opinion about what Trump tweeted today, so, they're going to comment or whatever. But, yeah, I don't know. It's just, it's tough to just stick with that constantly because of that whole paradigm that you fall into where you have to fall on one side or the other.
Yeah, and like I think just in general, branding is like kind of, I've never really like enjoyed that aspect of like career building, which is
well, it's hard too. I mean, the name of the show has changed, right? It was Primo Nutmeg and then Primo Radical. So, because I kind of fell out of love with the whole Nutmeg brand at one point, which is probably a bad move too, right? Because like it just creates confusion. So like. That's the thing, is like you have to be like as on point as possible. You have to like have your branding down, have your message down, know who your audience is, speak to them, put stuff out there that they're specifically going to want to engage with. And I don't know. At a certain point, again, that stops being fun. It's just all work.
Yeah. It's like people are corporations too, right? It kicks into this kind of weird territory. And yeah, it's true what you said before. I think, it's kind of like, when ride sharing was new and like not everybody was into it yet, and the people who like got into it first were making like tons and tons of money, and people
were they?
like this scheme. Yeah, like in the first when it was like first rolled out, yeah, there were people who were making a lot of money off of it. Like, oh man, we're gonna get, make 6 figures off of, just driving people, back and forth to conventions and work and stuff. But once it became a normal thing, it had to be streamlined, more people were into it, and now it's just kind of like another sort of wage job, I guess. People are disillusioned by it. And, internet attention is kind of like the same thing. Like,
well, that's probably what's getting worse, honestly, is the fact that people probably, there's so much content out there now, and especially, the really scary trend moving forward is like AI content, because AI is just going to flood the internet with so much content.
Yep.
And like anyone can create, really impressive looking content really easily. Like you see, it's not to the point yet where like they're doing full length movies, but like, have you seen on Facebook where they'll do like a fake trailer for a movie and it'll have like, all these dead actors in it or something?
Yeah.
Like, let's do like an Avengers set in the 1970s and it has like all these 1970s actors in the roles of the Avengers, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, I think within, I don't know, 5-10 years, whatever, like people will be able just to write a prompt and then create any kind of full-length motion picture they want, which is going to be kind of crazy when you think about what the ramifications for Hollywood are going to be. But just generally speaking, just content on the internet, like there's going to be so much content beyond what there is now. Like it's already flooded, but it's going to be just insane in a few years.
Yeah, it will. And it's also going to be a big change, because there's going to be a generation that comes up with that as just kind of like a normal thing. So it's just going to be like people, like us or people who are older than us at least have this kind of filter where it's like, well, this is like a special kind of tool or technology or form of communication that you can use to do X, Y, or Z. But there are other younger people who are going to be so used to it that there is going to be no filter. It's just going to be like, this is what like normal reality is. It's not a place where special communication takes place. It is what real communication actually is. Kind of like what social media is to, I would say, most people who we could call Gen Z. That's kind of what it's like, I feel like, for them. And what's interesting when you go into those kind of cohorts is not the fact that people are like brainwashed into believing in these technologies, but there's a very clear sense of like, oh yeah, this isn't reality, but it's actually the more true reality. So I'm going to believe this even if it's not real. You do see that kind of thing. And it will change, entertainment and media culture in, ways that we can't predict.
I mean, honestly, like just runs the gamut of like, AI is going to be like putting people out of work for their jobs, right? Like not just like content creators, but like, numbers crunchers and, a lot of jobs are going to be. I mean, go to a freaking McDonald's. Have you been to a McDonald's lately?
No.
You can't even make an order anymore. You have to use the screen for when you're making an order.
Huh. So you're not talking to a person?
I think like maybe it's still theoretically an option, like if you can harass somebody to come up to the front counter. But like, yeah, McDonald's or like Shake Shack or like other places I've been now, it's like they don't even take your order in person. Like you have to use the thing. So, yeah, I don't know. It just sucks the way like culture overall is kind of trending towards that, that whole AI thing or like depersonalized thing, like using apps. It's like that. Have you seen that somewhat recent episode of It's Always Sunny, where Dennis is like, he's trying to relax, like he's trying to keep his heart rate down, but he's just like going around like trying to order coffee and stuff, and like they're making him constantly download apps to do anything. Or like he rents a car and he needs an app to like unlock the car or run the car. Like I don't know. It's kind of scary overall when you think about just the trend that technology is on and like how this is gonna fundamentally reshape everyone's lives in the next couple decades.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's very. I don't know. Do you think there will be more? I'm trying to look for the silver lining in this.
It's kind of hard. That's what sucks too. Is like, you know, you think about that kind of trend, and it's just, I don't know. It just seems like dystopian. Like you don't see much appeal in it. And you go back and look at like older science fiction and stuff, where like they are thinking about the future. Like I'm thinking of like, you know, Star Trek or stuff like that, and it was very sort of optimistic, and they had like this. You know, utopian vision of the future, and like I think as we progress, like it's harder to sort of see a utopian future, and more people just sort of see it as a dystopian future again, because everything becomes less human, right? It's all sort of through these you know these artifices of technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think any situation where we depend on too heavily on external forces will wind up that way. The only thing I can see, I see kind of two things that might happen that might kind of converge. One is, I feel like there's this kind of paradox where the spread of communications technology actually leads to a stronger tendency toward localization. So what I mean by that is, for example, if you were watching television in the 20th century, like in the 50s or 60s, like everything was like broadcast media. So that's like, there's like a center where everything is made and produced, and it's spread out to millions of people in the country. So that here's your entertainment, and then here are the people who are consuming it. Whereas with the spread of computer networks, now you have like sort of, there's not like one center anymore. Like you can have like small time operations, you can have like people sort of making their own thing and connecting and finding ways to support themselves. You can be rich without being rich. You can have millions of people watching you without being famous. So there's this tendency toward like a kind of like hyper localization. And on the other hand, I think that there is always going to be like a countercurrent to whatever the dominant cultural trend is. So with the prevalence of this kind of internet technology, I wonder if there's just going to be people who will react to that and say, I need like something, like a radical change from this.
Yeah, but are we really even seeing that now? Like who's not embracing technology? Like the Amish.
Well, I mean, there are people who like to live off the grid, or like try to like build like tiny houses or whatever, or you know, just something to get away from like, you know, social media. Mm-hmm. They're not like massive kind of world shaking sort of things, but you do kind of see this like push toward, I feel like in our generation, I feel like there's this kind of like romance for like artisanal crafts, like things which are locally made, and like outdoor activities and things like that, which are a rejection of like a very sort of media dominated sort of childhood. And I wonder if that same kind of thing is going to happen once like the Web 3.0, which is driven by like cryptocurrency and AI and that sort of thing, starts to take hold. You'll see people kind of like people who are like looking inward, and maybe they'll make use of that sort of that localizing side of that decentralizing side of network communications in a way which is good for them in ways that we can't expect. So that's my attempt at silver lining. What do you think?
Well, I mean, going back to like the early years of this show, you know, some of the early guests I had on were people who were trying to create alternative local currencies. So like Berkshire's was one in Western Massachusetts, and there were some other ones, people like trying to break free of the global financial system by creating their own small local currency. I don't know if any of those are still around anymore, if any of them have been successful. I kind of think they generally weren't. So I think, at a certain point, like, when are people kind of forced to operate within the system? Especially, like, going back to the political climate, right? Like, at what point is, like, not engaging with it or falling within, what, people are expected to do? Like, when is that, like, oh, you're breaking the law because you're not participating in the system, or like how obtrusive does it get? Like, when the robot cops are walking down the streets and, demanding compliance or whatever. Like, it just, again, it's hard to sort of like look at like the future, like look at, what the world is going to be like when we're old men. Like, what is it really going to be at all appealing?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, like, 25 years ago, if you had come up to me and said, there's a way you can just like watch any show that was ever aired, just like for free, just like in your pocket, whenever you want, that you can do it and everybody can do it, it would seem impossibly crazy.
Yeah, but has it really like made life better? Like, it's convenient.
Well, that is the question. That's the question.
It's convenient, but like, I don't know if it's really improving anything, really. Do you think the world is in any ways, I mean, I guess, like, I don't know, like, like, probably, like, getting food to hungry people or, like, sanitation and stuff like that is probably a lot better than it was 25 years ago. Right?
Yeah.
So, like, helping, like, the most impoverished people is probably somewhat better. But, there's still, like, wars and really bad shit that happens to people.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a solid stance on that. Usually if you like look at something, there's, some kind of trade-off. Like, usually you could say that like modern medicine is a lot better, but the trade-off for that is you also have like the pharmaceutical industry now and an increasingly sort of toxic environment. So, I don't know. But,
yeah, I don't know. Just, I guess bringing it back to where we started out here with the, the media landscape and sort of where people are being directed. Like, I just don't see that getting much better either, like, I don't know if it's getting worse, but I feel like we're just, we're, again, like, look at what's happening in Los Angeles now. People are just like out fighting in the streets, and I guess they have been for, since Donald Trump came on the scene. I don't know if maybe like in a post-Trump world, if that sort of, that partisanship or polarization, if that goes away, maybe it's just him as a figure and the fact that like there's all this, so much invested into calling him a Nazi or, the years of saying he was a Russian agent, like just the build up of like, everyone needs to hate this man. And then like, if you don't completely hate him, then that means you must be on his side. I don't know if like, in 2029, after he's not the president anymore, I don't know if that kind of goes away and gets better.
Well, I have a take on that. I connect that to, in the United States anyway, there's like there's now a kind of electability crisis among the Democrats that stemmed from both his election in 2016 and from Brexit, sort of the populist menace. And I think the reason for that is that with, the internet and communication networks developing as rapidly and intensely as they are, what you find is that there's a big discrepancy between the people who actually operate those levers, who are, we'll call like the experts or the technocrats, and the people who actually use them to like connect to each other. So that's where kind of the new political divide is starting to form, not between conservatives and liberals in the sense that we were exposed to it in the 90s, but in this other way where it's like there are sort of like the common people, the people, sort of like the people as such, in contrast to like sort of the experts who occupy technical expertise and like the canals of information. So that's why you see like this emergence of like managerialism as like a dominating theme in politics. Like some people are qualified to do things and other people are not. And often those decisions like affect people in complex ways, which don't always accord with like common sense kind of experience. So I think that is going to continue to kind of get worse and worse, even after Trump leaves. I think he was just like, because he won through those, through the power of being able to sort of manipulate those passageways.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, what I wonder is like, doesn't that managerial class start losing power to AI at some point? You know, like if we're giving more decisions over every aspect of life over to AI, then, you know, doesn't that become more of like a profound crisis for everyone?
Well, I guess it depends. I mean, a lot of those guys, like who is the CEO of Google? He's not the CEO of Google anymore.
Tim Cook?
Someone like that. But someone who believes that, you know, AI is like another form of consciousness. And that since all forms of consciousness should be treated equally, then in a sense, like AI should be treated like, you know, like people, that has sort of like an equal right to, you know, legal protection and all the rights that we sort of naturally ascribe to, you know, human beings. So for that kind of person, it's not really a crisis at all. It's like the coming of the future.
No, but I'm just talking about like broadly the managerial class. Like if they're, you know, if their levers of power get kind of handed off to AI, then like they're not the managerial class anymore, right?
That's true. I don't know.
But I don't know. I guess it's hard to think. You know, again, we're celebrating the 10-year anniversary of this show, and
what a cheerful anniversary it is.
I just kind of wonder, like 10 years from now, again, like what is the world going to look like? Do you feel like on a profound fundamental level beyond like, again, like this polarization or like, again, like technological advancements,
mm-hmm.
do you think like the world has fundamentally changed a lot in the last 10 years? Because again, a lot's happened to us. Like a lot of big things have happened, but then they've also kind of receded. So like COVID, for example, was a huge thing that like changed the world. But then like after 2 years, everything sort of went back to normal.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think we're still seeing some of the effects of that.
How so?
And like, well, I think one thing is that it was just like another thing onto the pile.
Yeah.
Political pile that
it definitely stoked divisions. And that was another thing too, where it's like,
I mean, it's an invisible, ubiquitous enemy.
Yeah, but again, like I understand it was a big thing at the time, but like, you know, since it seemed like as soon as the Ukraine war started, like COVID just sort of went away and nobody really cared about it anymore, right? Like you don't hear about social distancing or wearing masks or getting vaccinated anymore, right?
Yeah, well, those are like the short-term things that I'm talking about, like people's attitudes toward like politics and kind of that same divide I was talking about between like, you know, experts and sort of non-experts.
Yeah, that's probably a good example of that. Yeah.
So,
yeah, so that's really like a cultural thing too, right? It's like how indoctrinated, or I guess I'm coming from sort of an anti-establishment perspective there, but like how much you sort of buy into like what the official narratives are and are willing to go along with it versus how much you're willing to just...
Well, here's the problem with that is, do you believe in expertise?
Sure.
So expertise is a thing that exists. So you go to your doctor because they've studied what you've got,
mm-hmm.
and you're consulting with them for, you know, advice on what to do. Ideally, like it's the back and forth. You know, you have your hunches and your intuitions about your body, and you know this person who has like looked at it clinically for like years and years and years. Between the two of you, you have like you can come up with a plan to,
as long as there's a dialogue and trust that kind of goes both way, and like the willingness of the doctor to.
right. But the point
Go on
is that
with
there
your
is a place, there is like expertise, and then there is just what you might call like common sense. So there are these two things. So if that's true, then what is the line between like trusting an expert and like being indoctrinated to accept something? There's always going to be that chasm.
Mm.
That's why science communication is so tricky, because the whole point is that you're communicating something which has to be technically understood to an audience that can't understand it technically. So that connection is important. It's important to maintain. It's not just like, oh, well, you don't like understand well enough. It's like you can't understand well enough technically. So there has to be some kind of trust. So you don't want to disavow expertise, but you also at the same time you can't just like accept what somebody tells you just because they say that they belong to this organization or they have this degree or whatever. And it's especially sabotaging when, as what happened with COVID, I believe, you have like there's a public health crisis, and the organization behind it has to kind of manage it on two levels. They have to manage it on the level in terms of like keeping the sickness contained epidemiologically, and also like managing the PR, which is hard to do. This might be a controversial thing to say on your show, but it's hard to do when like you're kind of responsible for it getting out there. Like, oh, remember that thing where you had to like miss your holidays, and you probably know somebody that died from it, and you got hated by your neighbor, and you hate your neighbor now because of the arguments you got in. Well, that was kind of like maybe funded by us. We told you it was bats, but actually,
Yeah.
it's it's part of the process of research.
Right.
So, what do you do with that?
And they lied along the way to call it that truth a conspiracy theory,
Yeah.
along with alternative treatments, calling them horse medicine or whatever they were saying.
Or they would say something like, mRNA vaccines like prevents transmission, but they actually don't.
Yeah.
They just-
Well, so again, like I think this is a big reason why things kind of just went back to normal, and everybody's sort of like kind of ushered into sort of forgetting about all that, because like it is insane what happened if you like go back and reflect on that whole 2-year period there.
Yeah.
Like how insane it got and how much we were being lied to. It's like, oh yeah, well just forget about that. Anyway, Trump's an asshole.
Yeah. But I mean the problem now is that like if somebody who doesn't like really like think about politics a lot, it's just like, they have a busy life, they look at that and they happen to like fall on that side of things, or they like see that kind of thing going on, they say like, oh well, why should you trust doctors or health organizations at all? If that's the case, if they're willing to go that far, why would you trust them with anything else?
Yeah. Yeah, and then you go like the whole other direction, and that's the other side of it too, is like the conspiracism part of it. Like you start going down these weird rabbit holes, and then I think also honestly get psyoped into believing conspiracy theories that like QAnon, for example. I kind of think that was just like a psyop to get conspiracy theorists to support Donald Trump. Like the whole thing around like, do you remember around like the 2020 election, how like they were saying like he was gonna come in on like inauguration day 2021, and he was gonna be proclaimed the real president, and like all his opponents were gonna get arrested. Like that was like a whole QAnon thing. So like that's the thing is like, yeah, when you don't have a balance between, I guess, like you're saying, the common sense and the expertise, then you sort of go off in these different directions where either you're believing everything or you're believing nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are a lot of things that fit that same category, I think, which is why, which is what I think makes Trump such a popular president. Is they kind of have a similar pattern. Like, look at like neoliberalism. Well, I think the economy feels kind of lousy right now. Well, you don't know what you're talking about. Sit down, shut up. We're going to take care of this. Look at neoconservatism. Neoconservatism? Well, I don't know why we're involved in these wars. This doesn't seem to have anything to do with us. Well, we're the experts on this. Sit down, shut up. Or especially like theories about like race, like, you know, talking about like structural racism or kind of more like abstract forms of racism. Well, I don't know. I don't think that was really racist. Well, you don't know what you're talking about. You know, you're on the wrong side of history. Sit down, shut up. And then, you know, I think COVID was just like another example.
Very explicit version of that. Do you have a medical degree?
So people feel like they're part of like I think people feel like they're part of like a two-tier system. Where, you know, some people control the levers and other people kind of have to, you know, deal with the consequences of it.
You know, something else I wanted to talk to you about too that, you know, we've said off air that I kind of always wanted to get on the podcast is when we were talking about how the left or liberals also kind of view these ideas that don't go along with their side or their narratives as like these viruses or like things that sort of infect the discourse and like they need to be controlled or eradicated, as opposed to like seeing it as people with different perspectives and trying to like, you know, have healthy dialogue and maybe come to some understanding or like just a willingness to see that, okay, these people have different perspectives and that's kind of where they're coming from, and you know, we're never going to see eye to eye here. But instead of looking at it that way, like there's a strong willingness, like I think it fits in the whole managerial class thing, to like, oh, like these ideas are bad, they must be eradicated. And we saw that a lot over the last several years with, again, Donald Trump's claims about the 2020 election or about COVID. Like these are things that like have to be erased.
Well, the way I would frame that is the traditional idea that is associated with free speech, you might call it the Millian idea from John Stuart Mill, the way he talked about it, was that free speech and disagreement are useful because it's like you have a bunch of people in a room who each have what we'll call an opinion. And when these opinions are combative, when truth is uncertain and we can't know it for sure, after testing and dialogue and discussion, the truth will come out by that means. So it's kind of a utilitarian argument, and it's kind of an enlightenment type argument. Whereas I think now people view information differently. I don't think they view the people who, they look at it as more, information as more related to sort of like mind-gut relations. Like if you consume something, it will, and it's bad, it will get into you and it will corrode you and it will ruin the discourse, as though the discourse is, instead of having a room full of people with opinions, the discourse is kind of like this pond or this body of water that can get corrupted and be bad for everybody. And this view to me is more transhuman because it doesn't to suppose that there are individual people with opinions. It relies more on the idea that there is a kind of like dispersed consciousness, and once something gets into it, then everybody kind of like becomes corrupt, and everybody is sort of susceptible to bad information. We call it malinformation or misinformation, as opposed to like a lie or, like a lie.
Mm. And that really started around the 2016 election, right? Because it was all about Russia putting these memes on the internet, and that skewed the election for Donald Trump.
I don't know when it started, but that is like something that like started to come up around that time, I think. When it first became like really sort of like...
Because that's like when the whole fake news thing started, right? Like before Donald Trump started calling CNN fake news, the hysteria was that there's fake news out there, people like Alex Jones, who are putting bad information out there that's misleading people and making them do the wrong things.
Yeah. It's a really funny idea, though, because not like laughter funny, but the idea of like misinformation. So what we normally think about something which is true is that we can use it to like do things effectively. Like if we know how to prepare and cut wood, then we can, we have another step toward like being able to like build a structure or build a house. And that's based on like what we know we can do and what we've tested we can do. But the idea of misinformation is that we can have all that same stuff and still build a house and still build a community, but it's all built around a sort of meta-narrative lie. The lie is the foundation, but everything else around it looks real. So it's not a lie, it's like misinformation. It's a very like abstract, postmodern kind of concept. And I think there's this kind of, I would just add as like a note that I think there's this fear that this kind of transhuman stuff is starting to really come out and like take hold of politics. I mean, we were just talking about AI 20 minutes ago.
Yep.
Is really starting to take hold in like real life. And that's why you see, we went to the Trump rally last year, and there's like such a strong, I would call it like a religious undertone to it. And I think that's what it's a reaction to, is that this other kind of force is like taking over. And we've got to sort of do what we can to get that out. To recover what we can of, what we think it is to be human.
Yeah. Well, again, that's like what the narrative is, but at the end of the day, like, who's pushing for this stuff? Again, it's people like Elon Musk and Palantir and stuff. Like, they're the guys driving this whole transhumanism thing. I think at the end of the day, or playing a major role in it.
Musk, I don't know. I don't think he's one of those guys like a long-termist, like some of his tech cohorts are. I think he's just sort of like, had a good comparison for him, but I forgot what it was. I don't know. I think he kind of sees the world as like sort of a video game that he could like, I don't know, because you didn't really like play a lot of video games growing up, but you get like something like SimCity, and you can like find ways to manipulate it. Like if you a city, you can build like squares that have like certain attributes. Like you can build like industrial or residential or commercial, and they take up 9 squares on the screen. But what you do is you put them down and you bulldoze around them, so that you still get like the same amount of people in one spot as you could if you had a 9 square, but since you took out the extra on the side, you're kind of like tricking the game in a way. So you can have like this little square with like a ton of people in it. I think that's like how he views the world. It's just like, like number and like rule manipulation. I don't know if he has the same like philosophical bent as like somebody like whoever it was that I was just talking about. His ideas about AI having consciousness. I think he's kind of more traditional in that sense.
Well, didn't Musk say there's only a 20% chance AI will kill us all?
What does that even mean?
For AI to kill us all?
Well, like a 20%
Oh, yeah, I don't know. Like, it probably won't happen, but it might. So we'll just we'll hook up Skynet and see if they launch the nukes.
Yeah.
Well, we've been going for over an hour, so we probably should stop pretty soon. But just going back to the whole, where we started here with, it's funny because we were kind of, I started off complaining about politics and we just spent an hour talking about politics. But like, do you think I should branch out and like create different channels or something, or just do stuff like this? Just put up any kind of podcast or YouTube video I want, and viewership be damned.
If you want my opinion, I'm not a social media consultant. I don't know what it takes to be popular, but if it were me in your situation, I would just make a channel. I would have one channel just doing the stuff that I want, not compartmentalizing it in any way. Just kind of like having like a garden, just like planting a few seeds and seeing where it goes. And I would have the Primo channel, and like every once in a while I would have like somebody, I would use the cachet of the channel to like have a guest every now and then, like somebody to talk to. It wouldn't be all the time, but it would be like once every like 3 or 4 months you'd have somebody.
Makes sense. All right, well, let's wrap up. I appreciate you being on the 293rd episode of the show. I'd like to invite you back for the 300th episode when we get the gang together and do sort of like, I guess this was sort of a retro episode that we just did here, but do something like this for the 300th episode and the 10-year anniversary in August.
Oh, okay. I didn't know you were doing a 300th episode. That sounds fun and exciting.
It will be.
All right. We'll see where that goes.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening to this. Please share your thoughts in the comments if you think I should start a different channel, or if you have any thoughts at all about this this conversation that you just heard. Thanks again, everyone, and until next time, stay primo.